So it's what, and
I can see you.
get us on tape, maybe
All
that's
your
the
stuff up.
clincher.
Kathy.
So let's just hope we get back from Georgia.
Make sure.
Because we wasn't planning
Stop
on
that
going
thing
to
and let me
Georgia
look
next
through
week.
it. You got the noise running too?
But now we're gonna have to go on next week.
Oh,
You mean it's picking up our voices?
oh yes.
We're getting myself ready for her. So, and we'll have to take that trailer.
New 93 Sonoma, 99.98. 156 only 6.9%, 48 months, not a lease. 93 Safari has
But anyway,
1,000 down 16.
it's like the Lord is just saying.
I'm not gonna be on it.
Get your ducks in a row.
Yeah.
Hey, dog.
I'm not
No
looking.
matter what the season, you can always depend on Crown Jewelers.
You're
for
wasting
quality
film,
jewelry
Joey,
at
and
very
it's
affordable prices.
expensive.
And with Christmas swiftly approaching, there's no
She's
better
wasting
time
it.
than now.
Well, downstairs is another disaster area that we got.
Is it turning?
I don't know what I'm gonna do with all that stuff in the first place.
Is it? You don't have to hold it down?
No, you don't have to hold it down.
Well, what, when you mash it again?
Hello there, Papa.
Oh, there.
But I told Dawn maybe.
Now, when you
we're
mash
not
it again,
gonna
it'll stop.
make that trip to Georgia
You
because
see R-E-C, the letters R-E-C?
like, you know, I had, before we went to Maine.
All right, that's recorded. Now, when you stop it with your thumb, it'll REC will go out.
So then, it's like the Lord has been telling me production of us.
It's still recording.
Huh?
Hello, I'm Joe Walters, and I'm here with my maternal grandparents, Joe and Edna Wentz. I was named after my grandfathers, who were named Joe and Martin, respectively. This is the day after Thanksgiving, November the 27th, 1992. I would like to ask my grandparents several questions today about their lives and families. Mamaw, could you tell us when you were born and what year?
I was born December 9th, 1921 in Atlanta, Fulton County, Georgia.
And what were your parents' names?
Rosa Lawrence Askew Kimball and George Barton Kimball, Jr.
Could you tell us one of your earliest memories?
I suppose the earliest memory I have is when an uncle of mine, who within days thereafter was stabbed in the back and killed, carried me to the drugstore and set me up on the counter when I must have not been over maybe 2 years old and asked me what I wanted.
Okay, very nice. Papa, could you tell us, please, when you were born and what year?
I was born November the 7th, 1917, in Union County, North Carolina.
And what were your parents' names?
Daniel Webster Wentz was my dad, and Ola Lugene was my mother, and she was a Ford before she married my dad.
Okay. Could you tell us one of your earliest memories?
Well, about one of the earliest memories that I can think of now is when I burned the barn down.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
We were tenant farmers, and one day with my younger sister, Evelyn, we went to the barn and it was cold, and I wanted to show her how we could have a fire to get warm. So the first thing you know, the barn was on fire. And my mother saw smoke coming, and she had a pan full of meat or something in her hand, and she threw it out the door and came running out there, but it was too late. There's no way to put the fire out of the barn. But they did get the cattle out. There was no deaths, but the barn burned down. And I remember that my dad had to have wood cut off of the old home place to get lumber to rebuild the barn.
I would like to mention that my grandfather is a very romantic man, and he loves my grandmother very much, and has always talked about her, has even written some poetry about her and their romance. So, Papa, if you would, could you tell us when you met Mamaw? And could you tell us something about your early courtship?
Well, I was 17, I believe, 17 years old, and I went to Atlanta, Georgia. My Uncle George lived down there. And on one of my rounds out at Lakewood Park, out from Atlanta, I met this girl. And she was 13. And as I say, I was about 17 at that time. And I thought she was the prettiest thing that I had ever seen. And she probably was. You know, eye is in the beauty. I mean, beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Right.
And that's the way she looked to me. She looked like Atlanta Queen to me. And I sang her a song as we were going down some steps to the lake. Do you want to hear the song?
Would love to hear it.
I don't have any music.
Would love it.
I'm dreaming of you with your eyes so blue. I've loved you forever, it seems. I have longed for you, dear, and wanted you near. You are the girl of my dreams. Although I have met you just now, I'll tell you of my love somehow. If I could but win your heart, little girl, then I would have treasures untold. The kisses you gave me in life's sweetest dream are even more precious than gold. I love your sweet face and your bright smiling eyes. How often the story's been told. If I could but win your heart, little girl, then I would have treasures untold.
What a beautiful job. We really, really love being able to hear that. And as I said, Papa was a romanticist. And I inherited some of that romanticism myself. And I like to sing to my wife and sing to her on our very first date. Kind of like you did. I guess you just passed that on to me. That's a great thing. Okay. Now, Papa, could you tell us something of your marriage, when you were married and where?
We were married in Cartersville, Georgia, May the 29th, 1937.
1937. Can you tell us, did you lived in Georgia, I guess, for a time period after your marriage, and then you moved out of state to...
A short time, we lived in Atlanta.
Okay.
And then we moved to Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay, and you've really been in Charlotte ever since?
Ever since, around Charlotte, except during World War II, we lived in Baltimore for around 3 years. Now, let me say a word. When we got ready to leave Atlanta, we bought 2 pasteboard suitcases from Cress's 5 and 10 cent store, and we packed all of our belongings, everything that we owned, in those 2 pasteboard suitcases, and got on the train, and we moved to North Carolina.
Isn't that incredible? We know that times were hard back in those days. There were tough times, and with the Depression and all that happened, we know that you have a lot of stories to tell, I'm sure, about a day and a time when things were hard.
We just wouldn't have that much time to tell it.
Right, right. I'm sure of that.
But there have been good times.
Yes, yes. That's great. It's good to hear these. It's good to be able to preserve this kind of thing and look at it as years roll by. Moving to Mamaw for a few minutes here. Mamaw, could you tell us when your children were born, the years they were born, and their names?
Joanne was born December the 1st, 1938. Her name is Ruth Joanne. She was named, we sort of wanted a boy, And since it was not a boy, we still named her after her daddy and after me. My name is Edna Ruth, and the Joanne is the first part of her daddy's name.
Okay.
And the second child is Janet Bunnell. She was named after, well, just another J for the Janet, and then Bunnell after Blanche Rogers, who is his mother's sister, who's very dear to us. And the third child was Joyce Lou Jean, and she's never forgiven me for that, but I named her after his mother, who was very dear to me. I could not have loved her anymore had she been my own blood mother.
Yeah, after all these years, 32 years of my life, I never knew my Aunt Janet and Aunt Joyce's middle names till this very moment. Did not know that. Very interesting to know that. Could you tell us something about your work?
Well, I forgot to tell you when the other two were born. Do you want to know?
Oh, yes, those years.
All right. Janet was born, I was expecting Janet when the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor in 1941. And she was born April the 15th, 1942. We had just built our first little new house and had planted grass before I went to the hospital, and when I came home the grass had come up.
Oh, how about that?
We had, Joanne was nearly 3 by that time. Then the third child, Joyce, was born in Baltimore, Maryland on March the 17th, 1945, and she was just a few months old when the World War II ended.
So really the war years brought 2 babies, the beginning of the war and,
Right.
and the end.
You know, ironically, I hadn't thought about that, but Janet was born about the same amount of time after World War II started that Joyce was born after it ended.
How about that? Yeah.
Just almost the same amount of time.
I really wasn't aware that Aunt Janet had been born in Baltimore either till
Was
till
Joanne. I mean, Joyce.
Joyce,
Yeah,
the youngest,
Joanne,
right?
Janet, and Joyce.
The youngest, born in Baltimore.
The next one was going to be Judy, but she never did.
Yeah. Okay. And could you tell us something now? I'm kind of changing topics again. About your work. We know that you had a long and illustrious career with a federal judge in our state. If you could say something of that, your work and your training and your background in the legal work.
Well, that would take too long. There's just too much, but I'll just have to say that the Lord gave me my job. I had been working in a hosiery mill, boarding stockings, and they picked out 2 girls that they said were their best and fastest boarders to go down to the employment office because they said that they wanted to know what it was we had that they could look in prospective applicants for that particular type work. And they tested us for about 3 hours, and a few weeks after that the lady called me and asked me to come down and talk to her, and I did. And she said, "What are you doing working in a hosiery mill?" And I said, you know, I had quit school when I was in the 10th grade and had gotten married, and it was about all I could do. And she said, "You're wasting yourself." She said, "Your IQ is far too high." She said, "You're among the top 10% of the nation, and that you must not waste yourself. You must educate yourself in some fashion." Well, I had 3 children, and she really inspired me, so I decided to take a business course. So I went to King's Business College for 5 months. I was working full-time. The man that I worked for let me sort of pick out my own hours, work whenever I could, but just get my time in even if I was working by myself. And I would go to school from about 8 o'clock in the morning till 1, and then the homework was pretty rough too. And I decided I wanted to be an accountant. And that was what I was really aspiring to be, because math was always my favorite subject. But after I finished school, I mean, I had gone for 5 months and I had finished a few courses, but I was tired. And I was taking shorthand, and it was taking up an awful lot of time because I had to practice at home and turn in homework and all that. And I was so exhausted that I decided I just couldn't do it anymore. So I went down to the employment office and applied for a job because I knew that, you know, I was burning the candle at both ends, having to be a mama and nothing to do with, and 3 kids to tend to, and a full-time job, and going to school, and all that homework was killing me. And I had no idea that that shorthand would ever help me anyway. But the man tested me at the A&PT company, and he told me that I finished that application test faster than anybody that had ever taken it, and I had made 100.
You sound like you're bragging.
I'm not bragging, I'm telling the truth. The God's truth, and everybody knows it. And he sent me out to the A&PT company for a job interview, and they hired me, and the man that I worked for was the sales manager for North and South Carolina. And it wasn't long until he was being on all these committees and on the school board, and he was letting me do his job and writing all of his letters and doing all the things that he was used to doing, even commercials for the radio ads and poetry and all kinds of stuff. He just let me do my own thing. And one day I saw an ad in the paper, and I was always sort of eager to get ahead, and I felt kind of bad every time I got my paycheck at the AMP because I didn't think they were paying me enough. And I thought, oh, I know what happened. He got drafted for jury duty, and he was making a lot more money than I was, and we couldn't afford for him to serve on the jury because he would lose a week's work. So I went down to the courthouse and asked them, could I serve instead? And they said I could. So I served on the jury instead of him, and I fell in love with it. I just thought that was the most fascinating thing I had ever seen in my life, and I wanted to work for lawyers. So I saw an ad in the paper not long after that, and I liked my job, I just didn't like my paycheck. And I went down and I interviewed for the job, and it turned out that one of the men that interviewed me was in the same Sunday school class with my boss, Mr. Christian. And a few days after that, he called me back for a second interview, and he hired me. He knew that I didn't have any education. I told him the truth. I have never lied about my lack of education. I told him the absolute truth. But apparently Mr. Christian had told them that I could spell and stuff. And they hired me. Mr. McMillan was one of the partners, and he interviewed me. And he asked me, could I spell? And I said, yes. And he said, well, what do you do if you don't know how to spell a word? I said, well, I look in the dictionary. So they hired me, and they had not hired anybody in that firm that I know of that didn't have a college education up to that time. Well, it wasn't long until first letter he dictated to me was 3 pages long, and I never had a letter over 2 paragraphs long to write in my life. And I thought, dear God, I have quit a job I could do for a job I can't do. But they were good to me. They were very patient and kind. One time Mr. Helms dictated some stuff to me, and it was all about this corporate meeting, and they had ratified a bunch of stuff, and I put gratified. And they kind of laughed along with me, but they let me learn. And I worked there for 13 years, and I know that the Lord made me get unhappy because I just got unhappy with my job and I quit. And then Mr. McMillan got to be a federal judge, and he hired me, and I worked for him until I retired about 1988, I believe it was. And when I retired, he hired my baby daughter to take my place.
And you worked for the judge altogether about 30-something years?
About 33 years altogether. But when he first hired me, I had to fill out this long application blank, about 12 pages long, 10 or 12. And they all kidded him about hiring an illiterate secretary because it had to go to Washington, and he had to sign the thing. And he called me in, and he said, I thought you went to I thought you had 10th grade education. I said, well, it said last grade completed in school, and I didn't complete the 10th grade. I was in the 10th grade when I quit, but the last grade I completed was the 9th. Well, that's what went to Washington. And they just couldn't believe he had hired somebody to be his secretary with a 9th grade
Well,
education.
you're anything but illiterate, that's for sure. And
well, the Lord did it all. Now, Joey, only God could do something like that, and I give him the full praise.
Well, he opens the doors for us, doesn't he?
Absolutely.
He sure does.
Didn't the judge tell you, say, I'll take care of it? Didn't he tell you something like that?
Well,
Don't worry
he-
about it, said, I'll take care of it.
No, but he really showed me off when we went to Richmond for our week-long. He had me doing legal research and writing stuff, and he proved to them that I could do what I needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
But he is the one that taught me and was patient with me, and he could read shorthand, and he'd dictate these long letters to me, and I would write them down in shorthand, and then I couldn't read it, and I would take them to him, and he would help me read my shorthand.
Is that right?
I got it down, but getting it back off the paper sometimes was... See, a lot of the words were words I had never heard of, but I did learn a lot of words working for him because he's got a mind like nobody could ever believe.
Yeah, I'm sure. You know, something that really kind of pertains to your work just came to my mind, and if I can put my hand on it here, I'd like to read something I discovered looking for some pictures this morning. This is a letter that you wrote, you sent to me. This is postmarked the 1st of July, 1971. And the letter, it has my name on it as well as my cousin's at that time. And it says, it's dated July 1st, 1971. Dearest Joey, David, Johnny, Debbie, Kenny, Michelle, and Dale Jr. Your grandmother is writing to you today because it is a day that will go down in history, and if you will always keep the envelope in which this letter is being sent, you may someday have a collector's item which is valuable. Here's the envelope. I'll put this where the camera can get a good picture of that. And then she goes on to say, today is the very first day that mail is being sent through the United States Postal Service, an independent establishment of our government which was formed to meet the changing needs of our growing society. The nearly 200 years of mail service by the United States Post Office Department has ended, and this begins a new era. Now, this is the part that I'm thinking that I was called to my memory as Mama was talking. This letter is being written at my desk on the 2nd floor of the post office building, where I work as secretary to Judge James B. McMillan. Here in this office, history-making decisions have been made which will enable children in the future to receive an equal opportunity for education, whether they are rich or poor, black or white. Your grandmother is proud to have been the person who typed the courageous orders which have been entered by Judge McMillan, and by the time you have children of your own, we believe you will be able to see the good which will be accomplished as a result of the outcome of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school case. I love each and every one of you very much, Mamaw Wentz. We have a son. He is 5 years old now, our oldest child, Christopher, and he is in public school. He is in kindergarten at Boone Trail Elementary School. I've been so pleased this year, Dawn and myself, at Christopher's awareness, beginning awareness, early awareness of ethnic minorities in his classroom. We have a lot of migrant workers in Harnett County, Mexican people, and Christopher has spoken of his little Spanish or Mexican friends. He has several which he calls by name and speaks of them often. He has black children in his room and has friends who are black. It makes me very proud to know that my son is in this setting, and he's also learned Spanish. He's learned to count to 10 in Spanish and can say the days of the week in Spanish, and learned these from his little Spanish friend in his classroom. And I have also, I share with you that same sentiment, how exciting it is that due to a courageous decision like this by Judge McMillan, children in America have equal opportunity to education, no matter what their economic status. And I'm delighted that my son, indeed, that letter proved to be prophetic, because my son is benefiting, as all the children are, from that case.
Well, Joey, I would like to add that I had totally forgotten the contents of that letter. I remembered sending the letter to my grandchildren on that historical day when the U.S. Postal Service changed completely. But I had forgotten what I had put in it.
Right.
But I knew at that time that the decision was not just for black children, but poor white children
Mhm.
were not being treated fairly either.
Right.
And there were conditions that had to be remedied.
Mhm.
And it took an immense amount of courage to accomplish that. And history, I believe, will forever be changed because of the Swan case, which was that. That was only one of many cases that we participated in. And I know that God Almighty put him in that job, and I know that he put me with him, and I will always be thankful to God that he's got a plan for each life.
Right.
And all we
Right.
have to do is to follow one step at a time, one day at a time.
Exactly. That's a lot of wisdom for us, and we are grateful for that. Now let's move on to Papaw. Papaw was a person who I always remember, and even this very weekend here at Thanksgiving, observed Papaw very busy. He's a hard worker, has always been a hard worker, a man who loves work and loves to work hard, and is by no means ever backed off from a job that was too hard. I had the opportunity to help him some years ago in his work and learned a little bit about welding and boilers, and I was not the best boiler worker by any stretch of the imagination, but I did crawl inside a few and help retube a few of them. But I always found his work very interesting. But Papa, if you could tell us something of your work and how you came to start the company that you had for so many years.
Well, after we came back from Baltimore, it was kind of hard to find a good job, but I always wanted to stick to welding and stuff like that. So I went to work for this manufacturing company, Queen City Engineering Company, and I worked with them a few years, and shortly after I went to work for them, they made me shop foreman, and I learned a lot about boilers. But somehow, along about the first of 1960 or the end of 59, I received a telephone call from my boss, and he chewed me out real good about something that I had not done. He asked me to have a tank shipped out that afternoon, and I gave the orders to one of the men that worked under me to do that, and he said he would. And he went off home, and it wasn't shipped, and the man in the office had to have it loaded, and I was held responsible for it. Well, the way my boss talked to me, it made me mad, and I quit. That was my last day, and I went in business for myself and stayed in business.
Okay, at this time I'd like to mention something that happened when Mama and Papa were gone on a trip to Maine. I believe it was this past summer.
August.
In August. Of course, it was very hot in August, and the house got warm. And
We were gone for a month.
They were gone, okay, a month.
About 5 weeks.
And during that length of time, the candles that were in this room over at the table had a special effect that took place. And Karen will show you now.
They died.
They really kind of lost their life, didn't they? And actually now they're quite special, I suppose, and make an interesting conversation piece. I guess you could still burn one of them a little bit, but the other two would be kind of hard, wouldn't it?
Had to burn them upside down.
Okay, all right. Now, moving on to one more question. This will be directed to Mamaw. Mamaw has, Mamaw and Papa have a lot of grandchildren and some great-grandchildren, and from those 3 children that she talked about earlier. So, Mamaw, could you name for us your children? Well, you've already named your children, so if you could name, maybe take each daughter and name her children, and then name your great-grandchildren as well.
Well, I can name them all, but now don't ask me the years they were born or
Okay.
anything like that, because they got sort of mixed up together.
Right.
But the first grandchild was Joey. You're the one that made a grandma out of me.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second one was Deborah. Janet's Deborah. The third one was David. Am I right? The fourth one was Kenny. Kenny Long. Janet has Deborah and Kenny. The fifth one was Michelle, my youngest daughter's oldest child, Michelle. The sixth one was Dale Jr. The seventh one was Johnny Walters. He was born just a few days before Papa really had an experience with the good Lord. And then, let's see, Johnny. Angela was next. She must have been number 8. I think my mind's going blank.
Let's see.
What about Michelle?
Kathy Walters was number 9. And Karen Walters was number 10. And Jason Redling, Joyce's youngest son, was number 11. And then when the great-grandchildren, you made me a great-grandma. Christopher was my first great-grandchild. Benjamin was my second great-grandchild. Let's see, Jacob was my third great-grandchild. And Jacob belongs to Michelle, Joyce's oldest girl. Then Emily, Joe, your youngest girl, was my fourth great-grandchild. And then Angela, little Trey, who is Franklin Calloway III, and they didn't want to call him Little Frankie, so she calls him Trey, was my fifth great-grandchild. So I never had a son, but I had 5 grandsons, and I now have 4 great-grandsons and 1 great-granddaughter.
Well, that is wonderful. What a family.
And if we live, I expect there'll be a bunch more.
I'm sure there will. That's inevitable. As a matter of fact,
probably a bunch more whether we live or not.
You're right.
As a matter of fact, I can recall when we got the news that Dawn was expecting Christopher. I was so excited because I was aware that this would make you great grandparents. And I got on the telephone and I called Mama Wentz. I think I actually called you at work, if I recall correctly. This was in November of 1986. And I told her the news, and she, of course, expressed congratulations. Then she said, and I knew that was inevitable. And I guess it's inevitable that it will continue. That's the way life goes.
Well, that's the way the Lord made for the world to keep on going.
His plan, His remarkable plan.
Right.
Amen.
Well, I am grateful to both of you for taking this time to share this with us. This will be a keepsake we'll have in our family, and we'll love to look at it.
We've enjoyed it.
Thanks. Okay, Mama, if you could answer for us, please, a question about your daddy's parents. If you could tell us who they were, and then after that, your mother's parents.
My daddy's parents were, my grandmother was Martha Cook Bowtell. Her father was an architect from Cambridge, Massachusetts. He settled in Atlanta before the Civil War, and their home is on page 19 of Old Atlanta, showing the home where my grandmother was raised. She was a little girl when the Yanks burned Atlanta, and she's told me stories of things that happened during the war. For instance, they had a slave girl who had baked cookies, and when they saw the Yanks coming, she hid the cookies under a cushion, and they had a parrot, and when the Yanks came in, the old parrot said, seat warm, and they found the cookies. My grandmother told me a lot of stories like that about the Civil War, and she used to take me to the parades, because they used to have a parade every year honoring the participants of the Civil War, and when I was a little girl, my grandmother used to take me to the parade, and through the years, it got fewer and fewer and fewer until there were very few left, but my grandmother faithfully took me to the parades, and she used to take me a lot of places, and I loved my grandmother very, very much. She died when I was about 9 years old, but I've got a lot of memories. She used to take me with her to church. She was a holiness woman.
Mhm.
She wore a long black dress that came all the way to the ground, and she was a little, short, tiny woman. But she'd take me with her to church meetings, and they would get down in the sawdust to pray on a bench, and I'd get down beside of her, and I was real self-conscious about it, and I would peep around to see if anybody was looking at me.
Mm.
But I remember my grandmother very, very well.
That was your
My
daddy's.
daddy's mother. My daddy's father died before I was born, and I never knew anything about his family, but I always had a great curiosity about him because he was from Portland, Maine, and his side of the family was a dead end. So this past August, he very sweetly and preciously took me to Portland. He took Joanne and me to Portland several years ago, and we learned a lot. Joanne did a lot of research and learned a lot. Your mother.
Mm-hmm.
But then it never did get written up, so I decided to do it by myself, so the little red hen. So he took me to Portland. And I also did an awful lot of research, and of course I duplicated a lot of the things that she learned, but I also learned a lot more. And I have it all written in notes, and someday I'm going to transcribe it, Lord willing, and get together. But basically, my grandfather in Portland, Maine was a dentist named Henry Gordon Kimball. He was from a very large family, and his family was well respected. They were good, solid people. And he had a brother that I had never heard about until Joanne learned about him when we were up in Portland the first time, named Charles, an architect who was killed in a fall from the balcony of a hotel. And for some reason, my daddy either did not know about his uncle who was dead, or he never told us. And I have a great curiosity about what really happened. And he also had one sister, and my daddy thought she was an old maid. Apparently, she was not married when my grandfather left Portland. But she later married, but she never had any children. And we found the old home place, which was a Victorian mansion, 3 stories tall. Beautiful place. The first time we went to Maine and found it, it was in pretty much its original state. But when we went back, this past August, it had been turned into an apartment building with 12 apartments.
Really?
And it no longer has the same facade. It just is totally changed.
That was a
But-
pretty long question you asked her,
That's a-
wasn't it?
Mama, what did your grandmother do for a living after the Civil War?
My grandmother was abandoned. She had, her first husband's name was Garvin. He abandoned her and left her with 4 small children. And she worked in a tailor shop as a lady tailor at a time when women just did not work. And my grandfather came to Atlanta, married my grandmother, helped her raise her 4 children, provided for her very well. And my daddy was their only child, and she was born to my grandmother when she was 44 years old. And my grandmother's first batch of kids never really accepted him, and my daddy was always sort of an outcast in the family from their perspective. But my aunt, who was my grandmother's only daughter, she had 3 sons, Uncle Claude, Uncle Will, and Uncle Arthur, and Aunt Annie. And I loved my Aunt Annie because my grandma wouldn't let me use her sewing machine, and my Aunt Annie would. And my Aunt Annie had a real pretty house with carpet on the floor, and it was always neat and clean. But she would let me sew on her sewing machine and make the biggest messes you have ever seen, and then she would get down in the floor on her knees and pick up the strings. I don't guess they even had vacuum cleaners back in those days, and she would pick up those strings off of her carpet and clean up, and she taught me how to read patterns and how to sew.
Oh, isn't that something? Well, I know you're quite a seamstress.
And I loved my Aunt Annie,
And
but my
that's where
mama
you-
never did like her much because she called my daddy a little bastard.
Oh,
But she said that my grandma was still married to
that's
Mr.
pretty
Garvin.
mean.
And he disappeared, and then after 7 years, they had him declared legally dead, and she married my daddy, and then Mr. Garvin showed up, so they say. And so my Aunt Annie always called him a little bastard, and my mama didn't like that, and my Aunt Annie
I'm
and
sure
my
she
mama never
didn't.
did get along very well.
Yeah. Well, I started to remark, I know you've always been an excellent seamstress, and I now know where you trace that back to.
Well, your mama, when she was just a little bitty girl, could match plaids. And she made doll clothes very meticulously and very beautifully. and could do things that most adults could not do when she was just a little tyke.
Well, I know my mom has been a great
She's
great
an excellent
seamstress
seamstress.
and
She
made.
probably surpasses me by far.
When we were young, made lots of clothes. I recall.
Well, when you got girls, you pretty well have to.
Right. That's right. You mentioned something, I believe, of of course, your times of your childhood with these incidents. I guess this was you said 8 or 9 years old when I think when she died. You were 9.
I think I must have been around 9. When my grandmother died.
Well, in thinking about that, could you tell us something of society at large during that time and maybe on to your teen years? I guess you were a teenager in the 30s, is that right? Early 30s?
Well, I remember when I was coming along, the only person in our whole neighborhood who had electricity in their house was the Cutchins family. I had 2 very dear friends, Margaret Malcolm and Tippy Cutchins. Tippy's real name was Anna, but Tippy's daddy worked for the railroad, and times were awful hard. It was the Great Depression, and Tippy's daddy still had a good job, and he was a foreman at the railroad, and they had their house wired with electricity, and they had a radio. And all the men in the whole neighborhood would gather on the Cutchins' front porch to listen to ball games. And Tippy had beautiful dolls and doll clothes and doll toy furniture, and Margaret and I would go down to Tippy's house to play. But Margaret and I got along real well when Tippy wasn't around, and Tippy and I got along real well when Margaret wasn't around, and Margaret and Tippy got along real well when I wasn't around. And usually the 3 of us loved each other, but we were kind of in twos. Very seldom were all 3 of us very agreeable at the same time. We grew up together, and Tippy and Margaret were just a little bit older than I was. And sometime during school, they failed a grade. They started school a year before I did, and they failed a grade, and then I skipped a grade, and they started a year before me, and I got a year ahead of them. And
well, so speaking of school, I just thought of this. Do you recall a favorite teacher?
yes, I do. I had a woman in the 7th grade named Ludy P. Head, and I think I mentioned earlier that math was my favorite subject. And I learned more from that woman, Ludy P. Head. I learned more math from her in 1 year than I learned all the rest of my whole life put together. And it's never left me. It always stayed. She taught it in such an interesting way that it could not go away. And the principal that let me skip from the 4th grade into the 5th grade was named Miss Orr. And she was somebody else that was pretty special. And
well, it's amazing how just one person can have such an influence on life, isn't it?
well, those 2 I remember very well. I also remember a man when I was in the 7th grade that made us learn the 6th chapter of Proverbs, and I have forgotten his name, but I still remember the 6th chapter of Proverbs. He made us memorize the 6th chapter of Proverbs. Go to the ant, thou sluggard. It's a very good chapter.
When they
Excellent.
when they put you in that higher grade, all of a sudden, do you remember about that Islam?
Yes,
that
I
you
do.
told-
I was used to being the smartest kid in the class, and all of a sudden I was the dumbest kid in the class. And they all knew how to do fractions, and I'd never heard of a fraction. And they had oral reading classes, and I was reading out loud, and I think it was about Robinson Crusoe, and I pronounced Island as Island, and they laughed. And it was during such hard times, and my shoe sole flopped when I walked. And I used to pray that they wouldn't call me to the board. They would call you to the board and make you write on the board the answers to problems. And if I would have to go to the board, I was afraid my shoe sole would flap, and I would cry if they laughed at me. So I used to just pray, Lord, don't let her call me to the board.
I think all children must experience these kind of feelings in school because our oldest, Christopher, wants to make just positively sure when he goes to school that he's got on the right color of clothes and nothing looks funny. Wants to make sure his shoes don't look funny. Wants to make sure that his shirt is just right. His book bag, everything. He wants to make sure that he doesn't do anything to bring laughter.
He's smart.
I think
Well,
that's
you
normal.
know, I guess I'm a paradox because I've always been really bad about speaking my mind and saying things that sometimes hurt, but I never could take it.
Mm-hmm.
I just was always vulnerable to criticism.
Right.
So, you know, that's
think-
just a weakness in my character.
I think most of us can probably relate to that. Hearing words about ourselves, it's sometimes
I could
hard to
always
take.
dish it out, but it was
hard to take it.
We've been fighting it out for 55 years, nearly 56.
Over 55, isn't it?
Papa, let's kind of turn attention towards Papa a little bit, and basically the same questions. If you could tell us about your father's parents and your mother's parents, and something of your childhood and school. One story that you can elaborate on that I recall when I was very young, you told me was during the Depression, when the soles wore out in your shoes, that you would take, I believe it was cardboard, and so you might talk about some things like that.
And put it in my shoe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, my grandfather's name on my daddy's side was Simon Peter Wentz, and my grandmother was Martha. I don't believe I can remember anything but Martha Wentz.
Wasn't it Hooks?
I'm not sure. And my mother's daddy was Jim Ford, and her mother was Mary Ford. And I told you about burning the barn up. That was about as far back as I can remember. And I can remember when my grandpa Ford died. And my mother wouldn't let me. I cried wanting to go down there, you know, at the funeral and everything, but I was too little and, you know, so much going on, and I remember about not getting to go. And what else was it you asked me? About anything else? About school or anything?
Yes, going to school, and you mentioned the shoes and the Depression times. And,
well, after I got up to be a teenager, it was about the time that Roosevelt was elected president, and
that'd be mid-30s, late 30s, I guess.
Somewhere around 1930 or somewhere like that. I must have been, well, maybe 31 or 2 or something like that. Well, anyway, they come up with something they called a WPA, Workmen's Project Administration. And they would, you could get a job on it and make about 50 cents a day, something like that, working. And I remember I got a job working on the WPA. And I had to walk about 7 miles to work and about 7 miles back. And I remember that my shoes didn't have money, you know, to have your shoes half-soled. And I remember I'd take cardboard and put in my shoes to keep my foot from being on the ground. And we saw pretty hard times, but there were good times too.
Right.
I don't remember about missing any meals. Of course, you know that it was cornbread and
We had
and
peas
stuff.
for breakfast one time, I remember that.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, Papa, you still like cornbread, I believe, too. It's
You're
still
right
one of your favorite.
He
You're
makes
right
me cook
about
him
that.
cornbread and milk every other night. I mean, I cook the cornbread and he buys the milk.
I know that without cornbread and milk, I don't see how we would have made it. And this came to my mind just now. We had one cow, and my daddy mortgaged that cow. And would you believe that we lost that cow? I remember about seeing the people that we owed the mortgage to and couldn't pay it. They came and got the cow and laid the cow off.
Is that right?
And that left us without any milk. And we depended on milk. So I don't remember from then on what happened, but I know the Lord worked a way and we survived.
Well, times were hard, as I have heard you talk about over the years, and my other grandparents, and I guess maybe it wasn't just you all. I think most of America during those years, probably most Americans
Well,
saw pretty hard times, didn't they?
well, during the Depression was when Herbert Hoover was president, and that's when the banks, you know, went busted,
Mm-hmm.
and there were people committing suicide, jumping out of skyscrapers. A lot of people committed suicide because they lost everything they had. But we didn't have anything to lose to begin with, so
Right.
we didn't jump out of any skyscrapers.
Well, I know
you-
those were difficult days.
You mentioned school. Now, I don't have anything real pleasant to tell about school, but I didn't go very far. But I remember that we had this old T-model Ford bus, and I had 3 sisters, and we would get on that bus, and he would start that old bus off, and he would jerk at least one of my sisters, you know, the jerk of the bus made her fall, and it made me mad. And I asked him, would he not start off until they got seated? And he wouldn't do it. He just went right on. So one day he decided to put me off the bus, and we had a scuffle, and he never did get me put off the bus. I was pretty good size, and he made me mad too, so I just about put him off. So anyway, he drove the bus on to school, but just before I got to school, I just opened the door and jumped out and went back home. I didn't go to school that day. So the next day when I went in, I knew that they had it in for me. So they said the principal's coming. So I just jumped out the window. It was about 1 story high, and I just hit the ground and run. And I've never been back to school another day in my life.
What grade were you in?
Now, you shouldn't have asked me that.
Well, I did.
That was the 7th grade.
7th grade.
Can I add something? I know I'm not in the picture, but let me just add something here about my daddy. I've heard you tell that story, I think, one time before. He might have not gone but to the 7th grade in school, but I think I've got one of the smartest daddies in the whole wide world.
Sure that.
And he's good in math. He could figure those figure the jobs when you were in the boiler business. He just could do all kinds of things.
He
that even I
figured
couldn't do.
diameters and
Mm-hmm.
pressures and all kinds of things that only someone that's very high in math can do.
That's right. So he's got the intelligence to make up for what he lacked in formal education.
Right.
And
Well, when I left school, I couldn't read a ruler. I couldn't read 16ths and 32nds, and I couldn't even read a ruler.
But he still is learning day by day. He still wants to learn. He realizes the necessity for learning.
Mm-hmm.
But I learned everything that I know, you know, just through life.
Sure.
And always, I knew I didn't know too much, and I wanted to learn more, so I tried to listen.
And he's always been very ambitious also.
Mm-hmm.
And he's always wound up being the boss at any job he's ever taken.
All except at home. I have always worn the pants in our family, but she just tells me which pair to wear.
I think all of us men who have wives and children know about that too. I can relate to that.
Well, he can't tell colors.
Oh, I see, yeah. Well, I was going to mention this, this came to my mind as well listening to you, and that is that I too am a person who likes to achieve and work hard, and I think overcoming obstacles is a very good thing in a person's life, and without some obstacles, I don't know that we get as far. I've had obstacles and I have overcome them, but I can say that I think that a good legacy was passed on to me and my family and siblings and cousins, and that hard work and perseverance pay off. And I finished college. It took me 7 years to finish college and 2 different colleges and a few setbacks here and there. But I was always determined, and I was always determined to get an education and finish. And I just think that was something that you passed on.
Well,
one thing I wish I could pass on to all of the children that are coming on along now, there used to be a time that you could make it without an education, but that day is in the past. Without a formal education now, children do not have very much of a chance. It is so necessary that if they would just realize how much they ought to apply themselves while they have the opportunity,
Right.
because once that opportunity is gone, it's gone forever.
It is gone forever. That's right. I look back myself on my high school days, and I wish I would have worked a lot harder in high school when I had that chance.
well, I contribute everything to the Lord. I know that He is why I'm here now. And I believe that everyone has a chance in life to say yes or no when the Lord speaks to them.
Right.
And I don't believe I would be here today when He called on me in 1971, which has been, what, 21 years ago. If I hadn't said yes to Him then, I don't believe I would be here now.
Well, you know, that's speaking of that subject. Could you tell us something? As a matter of fact, both of you, and Papa, we'll just start with you. Something of the church, your church background growing up, what church, and then when you accepted Christ. I guess that what you just said, 1971 was your experience with Christ, but maybe something of your church background and what church that was.
Well, I remember back when I was a kid, I went to a Methodist church, Mill Grove Methodist Church, but I don't remember too much about. I never did know the Lord. I would hear people talk about Jesus and talk about God and different things, but I never really understood what it was all about. And when we moved up here, we went to a Baptist church before we moved up here in 1964. So after we moved up here, we joined a Methodist church up here in Cornelius, North Mecklenburg. And I kept getting these little cards through the mail about administrative board. And I just pitched them aside. I didn't know what it meant. So I come to find out that they had put me on the administrative board, and the Methodist church is like a deacon in a Baptist church or something. So I decided that I'd better go to one of the meetings. I didn't even know I was on the board. So I went to one of the meetings, and I heard them talking about the Lord and things that was kind of embarrassing to me. I didn't really know what they were talking about. But we were supporting the church, but I never had a real experience with the Lord. So when your brother, Johnny, was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee, that's right, isn't it?
Sure.
In 1971, it was in March. And she had gone up there and left me alone. Well, I had a real strange feeling at work. And I felt like I was either going to pass out or die, or there was just something got all over me, like I just didn't know what was going on, and that just scared the fire out of me, if you want to know the truth. And I tried to get some help, and I go down to this place and ask him to use the phone. I wanted a doctor and get me in the hospital. So I got my family, I tried to call my family doctor, and another doctor was taking calls that day, taking his calls. And he talked like he was intoxicated or something. He didn't understand what I was saying. He said, "You don't sound like you're having a heart attack to me." And I said, "Well, you don't sound like you're much of a doctor, if that's the way you feel." And he said, "Well, I hope you die and go to hell, you low-life SOB," except he didn't say SOB, he said it out flat.
Is that right?
Yeah, and then I heard a dial tone on the phone.
Good.
So
gracious.
I came on home, and to make a long story short, about 6 hours I lay unconscious, semi-unconscious, and couldn't move for about 6 hours. And I promised the Lord everything that he would let come in my mind. Lord, I'll do it. Just don't let me die like this. I'll do it. And if something come in my mind, I'll never do it again. Never drink another beer. And I want to tell you, I made him promises that you just couldn't believe. I wouldn't have time to tell you all that. And all of a sudden, about 3 o'clock in the morning, about 6 hours later, he just healed me. And I come up from there and turned on the little old radio on the couch, and he healed me that quick, man. I got up there and turned the radio on, and I heard Judy Collins singing Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. And I know the Lord had that put on there for me. And and I won't take time to tell you all about it, but he showed me things that's unbelievable. After I accepted him and started living for him. And if you want to know the truth, one day I was in a friend's house, and he appeared before me and let me see him on the cross, and then he appeared to me alive, and I looked at Jesus. And I've never had my mind off of him since. I go to bed, before I go to sleep, he's on my mind. When I wake up in the morning, he's on my mind. And he's on my mind right now, and he's on my mind all the time. I can't get him off my mind.
That's
and I'm not wanting to either.
That's right. You know, I have done some reading about, there's a lady in the hospital. She was sick and been in the hospital in a lot of pain. She was, I think, a prominent lady, quite wealthy. And she relates how Jesus appeared to her at the foot of her bed, with his arms outstretched, and she could see the scars in his hands. And he told her, he said, you're going to be well, and you go out and you help poor people. And that's exactly what she did. And sure enough, she got well, and she got out of the hospital and spent the rest of her life helping the poor.
Isn't that something? Well, that reminds me, and I'd like to just share this. It won't take but a couple of seconds maybe. When Jesus appeared to me, I told you it was in this friend's house. And after I couldn't see him anymore, I told this friend, I said, you know, I just saw Jesus. And he didn't seem to be a bit surprised. And he started telling me about his wife was on her deathbed, I believe he said. And he said Jesus appeared to her, walked up to her bedside and said, I'm going to heal you. And he said almost immediately she got well. And said she's been teaching Sunday school for 40 years.
Isn't that incredible? I believe in those things. I believe very strongly in that.
Oh, I never did know before what people were talking about, but I do now. And you know, all these old Christian songs, you listen to them and you can tell the people that wrote those songs, they knew what they were talking about.
Well, speaking about songs, after he had that experience, he was acting very, very strangely. And he kept writing little bits on little old pieces of paper and just tossing them in the drawer of the dresser in our room. And one day I got to looking at them, and, you know, they fit together. So I put them together and I started typing them up. And he's written probably 150 songs or more.
Right.
The Lord gives them to him a line or two at the time, but then they all come together, and he has written some wonderful songs that cover almost every kind of situation that you're going to encounter in life.
Right. I can recall those songs and the writing of those songs from about that time. I was, I guess, 10 or 11 years old. But I can recall coming here for holidays and hearing you sing the songs, and I was always very amazed at how many, just over a few years, you had quite a collection.
And by the way, while we're at it, how about telling a little bit about yourself?
About me?
Yeah, about your job. What do you do now?
Now, for the almost 9 months, I've been at Antioch Baptist Church. It is
That's a Southern Baptist church?
It's a Southern Baptist church. I became a Southern Baptist minister some 4 years ago. had a church to extend a call to me in Thomasville to be their minister of music and youth. I direct, but now in Antioch, also a Southern Baptist church, cooperating with the Baptist State Convention of North Carolina and then the Southern Baptist Convention at large. And I'm really, really happy in the work that I do there. I have a wonderful congregation. We have a good mixture of older and people and younger folks and a lot of children. When I first went there and it started April the 1st, we had about, I believe, 13 children coming for children's choir, and now we have 36 coming. And they've all enrolled over those months and kept coming, and we just have so many children and youth. And I direct all the music ministry, youth ministry, and children's ministries. I've formed 4 handbell choirs. We have a 3rd and 4th grade choir, a 5th and 6th grade choir, 7th through 12th grade choir, and adult choir for the handbells. And they all ring their handbells, and they love it, and it really draws people in from the community.
So you like to work with young people?
I love working with youth and children. That's my favorite part of my work, is the time spent with the youth and the children.
Well, that's great.
I really love it. I just have a great time with the children.
We're proud of you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. And I'm going to be going to seminary at Southeastern Baptist Seminary starting January the 18th. Our deacons have approved me to do that, right? The deacons just approved that, and they're real supportive of me going to seminary and getting my ministerial degree there.
Will you live someplace else besides?
I'll just drive. It's an hour's drive. So
you'll come back every day?
I'll go 2 days a week for a while.
Oh.
Sometimes I have to go 3 days a week, but I won't have to go every day. They work out classes for ministers who are full-time. They work it out to where you can go a couple of days a week.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's great.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And we're about to run out of tape, I believe, so we're going to have to wrap it up. But I know that, Papa, you talked of your church. And Mama, could you just tell us about the church you were raised in, what denomination that was? And
well, my grandmother, I don't believe I mentioned on my mother's side of the family, my grandmother was Hattie Christian before she married Oscar Askew. And my grandpa Oscar Askew lived until I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. But my mama Askew, we called her Mama Askew, my grandmother Askew, lived until after I was married. And I remember them quite well, and we were all Methodists, and I always went to a Methodist church. But the first time I really found the Lord was when I was just a little girl at a revival meeting in that Methodist church. I felt a call to go to the altar one night, and I went to the altar and I surrendered. And even the neighbors said they could tell a difference in me. But that was when I was a little girl. I'm going to say that I was less than 10 years old.
Well, didn't you tell me you had a vision one time?
I was at my Aunt Annie's house long about this time. I spent the night with my Aunt Annie that taught me how to sew. I would a lot rather go to her house than to play with the kids or do anything or read a book or whatever. But anyway, I was spending the night with my Aunt Annie, and I was in a place that was so indescribably beautiful that I've never been able to put it into words. But the peace and the beauty was just overwhelming. And then all of a sudden, I was in a place where it was hell. That's what it was. It was just molten fire. God showed me heaven, and He showed me hell. And I cannot tell you whether that was before or after I surrendered my life. I suspect it might have been before. It might have caused me to become convicted during that revival meeting, but I remember that I was big enough to feel conviction, go to the altar, get down on my knees without being ashamed. And I don't really believe I've been ashamed to get down on my knees since. Because that's the only way we can really get to God.
right.
Of course, you know, you can pray walking around or driving a car or cooking supper or no matter what. Prayer is a state of mind and heart.
Absolutely.
And if you've got the Lord in your heart, you're going to pretty well Well, just in all situations, there's just no time and no place when you can't be in a spirit of prayer.
She's a preacher too, isn't she?
Right. Amen.
No, not at all.
John?
Well, you know, I really believe that, again, I'm a minister, and I've had a real strong calling from God about my ministry, and I don't doubt that at all, and I've been ordained. But again, I believe I can express a lot of gratitude for that influence, for your influence, and the influence that you all gave us over the years that has made me want to serve the Lord. And,
well, you know, it's ironic in my mind that he was raised in a Methodist church, and so was I. And, you know, I fully believe that God makes people different, but he doesn't really care as long as you've got Jesus in your heart. What you call yourself is not really important.
so true.
It's just
I've really come to believe that myself.
you've got to, if Jesus is in your heart, that's what the
Right.
important thing is.
Well, again, are so grateful for all the time you've given us today, and this is something that we will keep forever. And
Well, we have
might make
enjoyed
some
it.
copies.
You be sure and make me a coffee, boy.
Joe, if
We'll
the
do it.
camera is still
We'll
on,
do it.
we haven't run out of film. Karen had one little thing she wanted to ask him, and then if we
Okay,
could
let me check the
get
camera.
all the children in the video.
Well, come ask us.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wait a
everything's
minute.
fine.
Okay.
Karen, turn where you can kind of see the sit down. And, there
Can
you
we
go.
get
You want
the
us to
children
stay here?
picture?
I want to know if y'all ever got in trouble when you were little.
What did she say?
If we ever got in trouble when we were little.
Were you ever
Oh,
mischievous?
man.
Well,
I have many times.
I'm sure that we got in trouble lots of times. I don't recall any specific incident when I was little, but I remember that when your mother was a little girl, just a little funny. I was at work. It might have been before she was born, but I think it was after she was born. I got in a fight at work because of there was a girl that worked there that was really ugly and mean to me, and we were on the job, and she said to me some things about him that were neither true nor acceptable to me, and I said if we were not on the job I would slap your face. So that night after we got off from work, she was waiting on me in the alley where I had to go out the door, and she said, "You said you would slap my face, now do it." So I did it. And we got into the awfulest knockdown drag-out fight you have ever seen at the Hudson Hosiery Mill. And finally the foreman came and separated us. And she was a little girl because I took my baby. He said, "If you think you're not fired over this, you're badly fooled." Well, I thought I was fired, so I went to see my mama. I got my baby and got on the train and took off for Atlanta. And while I was down there, one of the girls where I worked called me and said he wanted to know where I was on Monday morning. I was not really fired, but I never went back.
Okay.
Are you still?
Still taping you.
You are.
Okay, Mama, you're going to talk about.
Well, I remember one time when I was a little girl that I got in trouble. I had an uncle named Uncle Hardy who was my mother's brother. And he picked at me all the time. And I never did like for anybody to pick at me. And he aggravated me so bad. And one time we were at my aunt's house and he kept picking at me. And I kicked him. And I didn't realize where I was kicking him. But he lay down in the floor and he hollered and he groaned and he had the awfulest fit. And all of my family told me how bad I was because I had kicked him in a place where you don't kick men. But I didn't know it. And that I really got in trouble. I don't think my aunts ever did really forgive me of that, but he never bothered me again.
You fixed it, Clark.
Well, good for you.
And Papa talked to us about setting the barn on fire, but he didn't mean to do it.
Did it burn all the way to the ground, Papa?
Do what?
Did it burn all the way to the ground?
Oh, man, yeah.
Did you get in
There
trouble?
wasn't any fire department. It was gone. It burnt everything. But it didn't catch your house on fire.
What, were y'all born in a hospital, or were you born at home, or?
All babies were born at home back then. Well, all poor folks.
I didn't even know they had hospitals back then.
All of his mother's children were born at home, and all of my mother's children were born at home. Dr. Etheridge delivered I think all of Mama's babies.
Well, when World War II broke out and I went to Baltimore, I had to have a birth certificate to get a job. And I didn't even have a birth certificate. I wasn't even registered. They didn't even know I'd ever been born. So the old doctor, Dr. Whitley at Mint Hill, he's the one that brought me into the world. And he was still living. And I went down there and I told him what my name was. And I told him my name is Joe Daniel Wentz. So it's on my birth certificate, J-O-E. And my mom and daddy probably named me Joseph. But my name now is Joe. That's what happened.
Well, I found out at World War II when I wanted to go to work in a defense plant, and I had to have a birth certificate, and I had never had one. So I went to Georgia. We were living in Baltimore, and I went to Atlanta to get a birth certificate, and I found out that all my life I had been named Helen Ruth Kimball. The doctor apparently misunderstood Mama, and so I told him that was not my name, and I had to get 3 people to swear on the Bible that all my life I had not been Helen but Edna. So on my birth certificate, Helen is stricken out and Edna is written above it. I like Helen better.
How about that?
You know, everybody knew me as Edna.
Well, Daddy, how did you get him to verify your birth date, your age? Was it written in a Bible or something?
Well, I'd always been told that I was born November, and I just had it up here.
Well, his mama knew when he was born.
Born November 7th, 1917.
So you are 75 years old.
Yeah, a little bit past.
They didn't used to keep records as well. That was before computers were invented.
But I always stay 75 until I get all the way to 76 before I don't say I'm almost 76. Of course, I had never been that old before, but I'm looking forward to it. In case I stay healthy, you know, and able to take care of myself.
Well, I won't be 71 until December the 9th.
I'm a little over 4 years older than her.
4 years, 1 month, and 2 days.
Well, as I said, today is the 27th of November of 1992, and the day after Thanksgiving, and we have really had a great opportunity today to have a wonderful legacy shared with us on video. And like I said, we will keep this forever, and we are very grateful to both of you, and we all love you very much.
Well, we appreciate you
love
doing
you
it.
too.
We love you, all of you, too.
And we are blessed.